What is up, all my friends? Welcome back to another addictive fishing video. Today we're going to take you out on the water and show you the 3 biggest mistakes that most steelhead anglers make as they're starting to learn how to catch a steelhead. Let's get out there and let's show you why you're wrong. Made it down to the water, and the first thing we're going to talk about today is your gear choice. I think most of all, and that's probably the question I get asked most online and in person when we're doing our seminars and stuff, is what rod, reel, line setup do you want to use to go out and catch a summer steelhead, or really any kind of steelhead. I wouldn't say that your setup really varies much when you're going from either a summer steelhead to a winter steelhead or whatever time of year it is. This is the kind of the typical and the best steelhead setup that you're going to want to have. So there's 2 rods I'm always going to take to the river when I'm looking for a steelhead. One is a spinner rod and one is a bobber rod. The bobber rod that I'm going to use is always going to be over 9 feet long. We are sponsored by 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗏, and they're one of our very favorite brands, but any brand will work for this. I like the 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗏 Guide Select Pro. The thing has an awesome warranty. It's just the right style of rod that I like to use for this, and it's very, very durable. I'm hard on my rods. You guys, I'm on the water all the time. I'm traveling. They're getting thrown in and out of the truck and in and out of the boat. So you need a good durable rod, especially if you're a bank fisherman like we're going to be showing you here today. This one here is a 9.9 6 to 12 pound rod. I like that 6 to 12 pound because it makes it a lot of fun to fight the fish, but also it has a very soft and limber tip so that when I try to manage my line, which I'm going to talk to you about here in a minute, you actually can get that good pull on the line. You can flip it upriver, and it's very, very easy to fish, and it's very user friendly. So now the reel I have on this is a 3000 series CTX reel by 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗏. I really like the 𝗪𝗏 too, which is a little bit cheaper option. Again, very durable reel, lasts a long time, and it fits a lot of line on this. You want to keep your reel style in between a 30 or a 40 series or a 3000 or a 4000 series reel, because any smaller or any bigger is not going to really work for this type of fishing. One of the biggest mistakes of all that I think people make with the setup is the pound of line that they use for their braided line. I have an Addicted Enforcer braided line on here in a 65 pound braid. It seems very, very heavy, but the reason I like that 65 pound braid is because it acts like a fly line. When we're fishing a bobber setup like we are here today, we want our line to be sitting up on the surface of the water, not getting sucked down in the boils and in the swirls, and getting our line down into the water system, because I want to be able to mend my line. I want to be able to manage my line, and I want that stuff to sit on the surface. And the heavier pound line sits better on the surface than a lighter pound line. The 30 pound, 40 pound actually likes to sink and go down through the water column. The 65 pound sits right up on top just like a fly line. Now in the summertime, what will really set you apart as an angler is using the right pound test of leader line and your bumper line. Now one thing I always like to do in the summertime, because the water is clear and you have conditions where the fish actually can tend to be a lot more spooky, is I add a bumper line. But I have a 20 pound fluorocarbon line tied to my 65 pound braid, and that's connected by a blood knot. Now if you guys want to learn how to tie a blood knot, there's plenty of knot tying tutorials here on the YouTube channel. Just go back down into the video log and you guys will be able to find them. There's about 4 or 5 different kinds of knots you can use to do this, but I like the blood knot. I always say tie the one that you're best at tying, not the one that everybody says is the best to use, because a good tied knot is a lot stronger than one that you don't do right. The other part of the leader technique is how long you're making your leaders. As you can see here on just this general setup that I have, this is a bait setup. We're going to go over a couple of other setups, but even with a jig, even with a bead, basically anything that you're going to be running below your bobber, you're going to want to have it on a little bit longer leader. As you can see here, I have a 1/2 ounce bobber set up for this river that I'm fishing today. And the reason I have that 1/2 ounce on there is so I can get down in the deeper holes, but I don't want the fish to be scared by that weight and that heavier pound test that is my 20 pound above my bobber. So I want to use at least a 4 to a 5 foot leader, make it a little bit longer and get it away from that weight setup. I've even added a couple split shots to get myself down. We'll talk more about that setup once we're casting out into the river. A general rule of thumb is having a longer leader and a lighter leader. All right, so a little recap. Generally, a longer leader and a lighter leader will lead to catching more fish. That was hard.
It's a tongue twister.
Yeah. So the biggest mistake I see beginner anglers or even avid anglers use is using the wrong style of bobbers in the summer. From a fixed float to a half-ounce float, you normally don't want to be fishing a very heavy float, especially if we're talking steelhead. The only time I use a big float is when I'm going to be specifically targeting salmon, and that's not what we're talking about today. So I have a clear plastic bobber on that's rated for a ½ ounce of weight. You really don't want to go any bigger than a ½ ounce, like I said. You want to stay from about a ½ ounce down to about a 3/8, and if you go any lower than that and you're not going to be fishing very deep water, you're going to want to go with an addictive fixed float. The reason I like the clear bobbers over any is because obviously it's very unintrusive to the fish. They don't see it very well, and this teardrop shaped fishes very, very well in the style of water that we fish in the summer. All right, now we're going to take a step over to the water line. I'm going to show you guys why the weight of your bobber matching the weight on your line is so important. So what I'm going to do here, guys, is I'm going to cast out and I'm going to show you how a ½ ounce bobber should be sitting properly in the water. You should only have about probably a ½ inch of that bobber sticking out of the water that's not the colored part of it. If it's sticking more than about a ½ inch out of the water, you don't have enough weight on your bobber. If it's buried down a little bit into the color on the top of that bobber, it means you have too much weight. So then you're gonna need to adjust. So whether you have one of the stick weights or an inline weight, whether you have a Dave's Tangle Free on there, or you have a piece of pencil lead, you're gonna adjust that to match the bobber that you actually have on your line. Most of them are already labeled with the actual ½ ounce on there, so it'll be easy for you guys to figure out. So what I'm gonna do now, guys, is demonstrate why you don't use the big bobber. I see it all the time out there on the water, beginner fishermen using way too big a float for the kind of fishing that they're doing. So this big bobber is not going to sit right in the water, and I'm going to show you exactly why. As I said before, you really only want about a ½ inch of that color on the bobber sticking out of the water, and this one is probably going to be like here with this ½ ounce of lead. So let's show you. So as you can see, you have almost the entire bobber sticking out of the water. I've probably seen hundreds of fishermen over the years fishing a setup just like this. What this is going to do is it's going to pull my gear too slow in the water current, and I'm not going to be effectively fishing down near the bottom of the river. It's not so much that the float doesn't float your gear down the river just like a normal weighted bobber would, but what it does is it floats at a different speed as the current because that bobber is too big. So let's review really quick. Good, bad. Okay, quick little overlap of the first mistake people make. Make sure you have the right size rod. Make sure your line is adequate to the style of water that you're fishing, and make sure you go a little bit lighter on your pound test, and make sure you have the right size of bobber on your line. Now on to mistake number 2. Second mistake we're going to talk about, guys, is choosing the right style of water given your conditions. Many days in the summertime that you're summer steelhead fishing, it's going to be sunny out. What that means is you're going to want to stay away from flat, shallow water. And I'm going to show you over the next few minutes the exact style of water that you want to look for when you're fishing for summer steelhead. So right here next to us is a hole that I'm not going to spend a lot of time at. What I have is a small bucket on the inside. I have a creek coming in behind me, so there's some nice cold fresh water, which could be a good option. But what I'm seeing here is a long, flat section of the river with not a lot of cover for the fish. I'm not saying this can't be a good spot to fish, but I'm not going to spend much time here. This time I'm going to spend is in the spot like where I'm going to take you to next. Now this is a little bit more of the style of water that I'm talking about. As you can see, guys, it comes off of this shallow flat, dumps into this nice deep bucket, has a nice steady walking speed current, and you can't see the bottom. That's going to give the fish a lot of protection. It's going to give them protection from the sun and predators, and there's going to be a nice deep pool of cool water down there for them to get away from that hot sun. So this style of water makes me want to fish a bobber and a jig setup. So let's show you how to do that. All right, naturally we're going to go back to our ½ ounce bobber here because that's what we want to stick with. And take this giant thing off of there. Slide my ½ ouncer back on. And I'm going to do my stealthy jig setup today. Something that if you're not going to use a addicted fixed float and you're in deeper water like this, which this sort of situation is going to be too deep for an addicted fixed float. If it's going to be any longer than your rod is long, I'd like to say, you're not going to be able to fish it very well with that fixed float. If it's anywhere it's under about that 9 feet deep, you can fish it with a fixed float, and I would recommend it. Hashtag wet your knots. So what I'm doing here, instead of trying to find the inline floats, I do find a lot of times, especially when fishing's hot, you go to the tackle store and all the good stuff that you need is normally sold out. I'm sure you can all relate. So what I do instead of using the inline ½ ounce lead is I'll use split shot. Okay, that should do the trick. All right, and now because I just preached it, I'm gonna go with 10-pound test and about 3 or 4 feet of it. Normally with a jig setup, you're gonna wanna go with a slightly shorter leader. If you do go super long on that jig leader line, you're gonna wanna add a little split shot in the middle of it, which is another little trick. Now for those of you who don't take a yardstick on the river, usually about 3.5 to 4 feet is about from the middle of your chest. If you're a giant guy like me, it's about from the middle of your chest out to the end of your arm. 6 feet or so is about as long as my arm width. So if you're rated in that 5.5 feet to 6 foot range as a human, normally from the middle of your chest out to that farthest part of your arm is gonna be about 3.5 feet. Okay, about 3.5 feet should be perfect. All right, now for the leaderboard. I think a day like today, sorry addicted jigs, nightmare it is. Okay. Bobber and jig is set up. It's time to catch a fish. So what I'm gonna do is I'm always gonna start the closest that I possibly can when I go to start casting. My technique is the close, middle, far. If you guys have always or ever watched an addicted video, when it comes to a tutorial, I really preach that with every sort of setup. Close, middle, and then far. Never step up to the river and then cast as far as you can across on that first cast. You're wasting a lot of time and you're wasting a lot of water that's in front of you. Ooh, fish. You see my bobber sitting straight up and down? There's less than about a ½ inch of that color sticking up out of the water. I'm fishing perfect. Now line management is probably one of the biggest keys to catching fish when you're steelhead fishing. Situation like this, I have no current on the inside and I have a pretty swift current on the outside. What that's gonna mean for me is I wanna keep my line out of that slow water on the inside. That's why we have a 9.5 foot rod, so that I can use my rod tip and my rod length to manage my line as it floats down the river. So in this situation, I'm gonna keep my wrist cocked at 45 degrees. I'm gonna make sure my line is staying out of this slow water and only in the fast water, and I'm gonna let that thing float at the perfect speed of the current. Another quick tip for you guys is slowly get deeper and deeper as you go into the hole. What I don't wanna do when I'm fishing a jig, or really any setup, is immediately go and hit the bottom. So as I go down, I know I made my first few casts, I didn't hit the bottom. So I'm gonna go about a bobber's length deeper, which is only about 5 to 6 inches. All right, so worked this hole pretty good. I'm gonna go find the second piece of water that you're gonna wanna look for when you're out here on a day like today.
Are you filming for a YouTube channel for fishing? What's the channel?
Addicted?
Oh, I know you.
Yeah. How are ya?
Fucking good.
We're just doing the 3 biggest mistakes you make steelhead fishing today.
Ah, that's cool,
Yeah,
man.
yeah. So, oh man, what's your name?
Ryan Mack.
Ryan, nice to meet you, buddy.
Nice to meet you, brother.
Cool.
Hey, brother, right on, right on. Hey, thanks, fellas. Have a good one, eh?
Take it easy.
Right on.
Good meeting you. Yeah, good to meet you. Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, so the second piece of water you're gonna really wanna utilize, and the technique you're really gonna wanna utilize in the summer, is spinner fishing in the fast water. On a day like today and most days in the summer, when you have a lot of sun and not a lot of cloud cover, these fish are gonna go to places that have a broken surface of the water. And that is just like what you see here behind us. The first little spot I showed you that I said wasn't the proper type of water for a day like today, that was flat, shallow, and very, very clear. This is kind of the contrary to that. This water is moving probably 2 to 3 times faster. You have a broken surface from a shallow riffle up ahead of us, and what it's gonna do is create cover, oxygen, and a great spot for fish to sit on a sunny day like today. All right, to the spinner box we go. Where are you? Oh, that's it. So a day like today, nice sunny weather, I'm gonna go for some kind of spinner that is a little bit more of a natural color. It's not quite as bright or intrusive. This little Michael Jackson pattern works really, really well on a sunny day like today, or your blues, or your gold bladed or brass bladed spinners also work very, very good on a day like today. But today, I'm going with this guy right here. Just kidding, I'm going with this one. I lied to you guys. The reason I'm switching is because this one is a little bit heavier and it has a better hook. One thing I always do with my spinners is I like to switch out the factory hook out with a 2/0 Mustad Siwash hook, and that's what we have on here. This is one of our addicted custom colors that we did in one of our limited drops. You guys can check these out. A lot of times we'll have these spinners and different products like this on our limited drops 3 to 4 times a year, so be sure to check the addicted.fishing website and you can get yourself a spinner just like this one. Now the reason I'm going with the torpedo body style spinner rather than the bell body style spinner like a blue fox is because of the type of water I'm fishing here. I don't have very many big boulders or very shallow water here. I have a pretty swift current, probably about 4 to 5 feet deep, and I want to be able to get down quickly when I'm making my casts. So real quickly, what goes back to our first mistake, other than fishing in the wrong water, we're going to talk about the spinner rod that you're going to want to use for this. That is a big mistake that a lot of people make, is using the wrong type of rod to fish a spinner. This is a very hands-on style of technique. You want to be able to feel as much sensitivity as you possibly can as you're floating down the river. So what I have here is an 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗪 Select Pro. Once again, this is a 9-foot, 8 to 17 pound rod. I love this for spinners. One, it has that very light action tip again, so it doesn't take a lot of effort to cast. Two, it's the right length. Anything that's over about 9 feet, you're gonna lose a ton of sensitivity, and you're not gonna be able to feel your spinner or the bottom. And that's an issue. That means you're either gonna, one, miss a lot of fish, or two, you're gonna get hung up and snag and lose a lot of valuable spinners all the time. Now the most important part of this setup, other than the length of rod, is the line that you use for this. This is, again, the Indicated Enforcer braid, but this is in a 30-pound test, not the 65 like you're gonna use for your bobber rod. The 30-pound test, you want to cut through the water. This is a presentation that we want down and close to the bottom. So the only way to do that is to resist the speed of the current and resist the water tension and get our spinner down towards the bottom of the water. And the only way to do that is to resist the water current and the tension of that pulling on your line and get yourself down towards the bottom of the river. A big, heavy 65-pound test is gonna wanna float. It's gonna wanna keep your spinner up towards the surface, and that's not what we want. We want a 30-pound or even down to about a 20-pound enforcer braid so that this cuts through the water, gets us down close to the bottom and in front of the fish. The other option for this is the 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗪 rod in the bait caster. This is an 8 to 17-pound rod as well, and just a little bit longer in a 9.3 model. It's a little bit graduated up level of rod, so it's not something you're going to want to go straight out and buy, but you're going to want to work your way up to it. But that's what I'm using. Let's head upriver. So here we have it, everyone. We're standing in front of what I would call a quintessential steelhead spinner run. What we're going to do here first is very adamant, or as I'm very adamant on, is the close middle far technique once again. What I always say is cast the first place you think a fish might be. To me, it's just out on this current line, right on the base of that shallow spot over there. I'm going to cast out, keep my tip low, reel my spinner nice and slow, and then once it gets to a certain point, I'm going to let the current do all the work. That is the biggest key and the biggest cheat code with spinner fishing, is to, one, not cast too far upriver, and two, not reel too quickly as you're bringing it back. The current of the river, when you're in a fast water spot like this, does a lot of the work for you. The easiest way to use that current is keeping your cast below 45 degrees upriver, letting that belly form, keeping your rod tip low, and following that spinner all the way through rod tip. What happens if you don't follow the spinner is you lose a lot of sensitivity. Why that happens is because you get that spinner swinging around, your line starts pulling off your tip as an angle, and all you feel is the tension of the water, not the thump of the spinner. Second cast, I'm going to go a little bit further. Tip low, spinner started, following again my spinner all the way through the drift until it gets to about 80-90 degrees downriver, and I bring it back in. Now my third cast, I get to have fun. I get to whip it way out there. Again, reel up my slack. What I'm doing here is I'm letting the spinner sink and fish at the same time. What's imperative that you don't do is just let that spinner fall until it finally makes contact with the bottom. I like to engage my spinner, keep my tip low, and fish that thing down in the water column. The way you control the depth of your spinner is with your rod tip. If you watch here, if I put my rod tip up, my spinner's right on the surface. If I put it down, it starts to sink. And that is the easiest way to gauge your spinner depth as you go through the run. You keep your tip low until you feel the bottom or a fish, and then you slowly raise it up, and that will bring the spinner off the bottom and keep you right in the strike zone. Okay, now that I've made a good session of casts going close, middle, far, I'm going to move downriver about 10-15 feet. So I've made my way all the way down back to my bag, about 100 yards of river here. The thing is, with this type of setup and with this method, that's the thing about spinner fishing. It's the perfect method for somebody with ADHD like me. It keeps you moving, it keeps you active, and it helps you learn a lot about the river that you're fishing. The one thing that will make you a better spinner fisherman is covering a lot of water. So that's using that close, middle, far technique, taking those 2 steps down river after each cast, and covering a hole thoroughly, and then trying something different. All right, so quick recap. Second biggest mistake people make is choosing the wrong water to find fish in. I've showed you 2 perfect styles of water, so try to just mimic those. And now on to mistake number 3. All right, so mistake number 3 a lot of times is not fishing the right rivers. It's very, very easy usually to find summer steelhead if they're in a river system that's near you, if there's hatchery fish. Sadly enough, in the United States these days, summer steelhead that are wild are very, very, very hard to find, and they're very endangered, so a lot of times we don't even want to go target them. But luckily there's one of the most incredible resources in human history to find these fish, and that is a cell phone and the internet. And normally with a simple Google search, you'll be able to find a record of where these fish are actually planted in your local state. Now the next key is figuring out which rivers to fish at what time of the year. So the time of year that we're filming this video in right now is June. And as you can see, there's still a lot of water in some of these rivers. The river that we're fishing today is a dam release river, or a tailwater stream they call it. Normally this time of year, you're going to want to focus more on rivers that are depending on snowmelt. This river will have water all throughout the season. Normally, this is the river that I'm going to want to fish later on in the season, more July, August, and September for these summer steelhead. More commonly this time of year, I'm going to want to focus on a river that's dependent on snowmelt. One that actually has a glacier on it or has some sort of runoff flowing into the river. The reason for that being is those fish will normally always show up earlier. That being because they don't have as much water later on in the summer to make it up that river. As we get into July, August, and September, I'm going to want to focus on the tailwater streams because those will only get to a certain level. By law and by the federal government, a lot of the tailwater rivers or rivers with a dam can't be allowed to go below a certain water level, which is very convenient for the fishermen. All right, everybody, those are what in my mind, and there's a lot of people's opinions out there, so I'd love to hear yours, the 3 biggest mistakes that steelhead fishermen make, especially in the summertime. All these mistakes that I talked about really apply for any sort of steelhead. So if you're watching this video in a different time of year when you're winter steelhead, the length of leader and the weight of leader really matters, the style of water you're fishing really matters, and the time of year and what river you're fishing really, really matters when going out to catch a fish. Now guys, we've been making these tutorials a long time, and I am starting to run out of ideas. I would really love to know what you guys want to see and what type of things you don't know and what kind of things that you would like to learn more about. So please comment below and let us know some of your ideas and some of your suggestions for what kind of content you want to see next. And if you like this video, go down here, hit subscribe, turn those bells on, and give this video a thumbs up, and we would really appreciate it. So until next time everybody, you all stay fishy. We'll see you out there.